Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Love Henry podcast, produced by the Henri Nouwen Society. My name is Bruce Adema, and I'm the executive director of the Henri Nouwen Society, and therefore part of a great team that encourages spiritual transformation through the writings and legacy of spiritual guide Henri Nouwen. Maybe you've appreciated Henry's wisdom for a long time. Maybe you've just been introduced to it. Either way, I encourage you to sign up for the daily meditations on our website, henrinouwen.org, and be reminded every day that you are a beloved child of God. Our guest today is Sharon Ramsay. Sharon received her Master of Divinity degree in 1994 and now works as a registered psychotherapist and marriage and family therapist, helping individuals journey through unexpected experiences in different seasons of life. Now that's fantastic. Another wonderful thing about Sharon is she's a board member of the Henri Nouwen Society. Yay, Sharon. I love that. Thank you. And thank you for joining us, Sharon. Now, I've introduced you in the most brief of ways. What more should we know about you that you would like to share with us?
Well, first of all, thank you, Bruce, for that introduction, and hello, everybody. I would say it's important for folks to know that I'm a wife and a mom, a daughter, a sister, and a friend to a number of folks. And I'm currently a doctoral student in counseling and spirituality and psychotherapy. So lots of interesting things. And perhaps the weirdest thing, or the thing I love the best, is that I love fountain pens and stationery. So the fact that Henry would have written letters to people sort of really speaks to my fountain pen, paper-loving heart.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah, as I'm recording this, Sharon, the table that I used in my desk was Henri Nouwen's personal writing desk that he had in his bedroom. I am so honored to have this piece of furniture that I sit at every day and do my job. It's a real privilege.
Lovely.
I love that you're into pens. That's another thing, actually, we share. I'll have to talk to you about that offline sometime.
Fair.
Our podcast that we call Love Henry is because we're drawing on the letters that he wrote. During his life, he was a prolific letter writer. He wrote many books, he gave many lectures, he led retreats. Many people became familiar with him or got to know him through one of those means, and they would write to him, asking him questions, seeking guidance from him. And invariably, Henry would write them back. He had this lovely habit of keeping every letter that he received. Not only that, he made a carbon copy of every letter that he wrote. So in the archive, which is at the University of Toronto, the Henri Nouwen Archive has over 16,000 letters by Henri Nouwen. Some of them have been gathered and put together in a book called Love Henry. It's a lovely book. I encourage you to get a copy of it for yourself. But what we're doing in this podcast is taking one of those letters and engaging in conversation with a guest who has insight into it or something to add in the modern context to it. Today, that is Sharon. Now, the letter for today is a bit unusual in that it wasn't written to just one person, but to a gathering. In a message addressed to pastoral workers, which came together for the annual conference of the Free Methodist Church, Henry shares reflections on weakness and vulnerability in ministry, a concept that he explored in his 1972 classic, The Wounded Healer, and that he later exemplified as a member of L'Arche Daybreak, a community of care and support and love for people that have disabilities. Now, let me read for you Henry's letter to the Free Methodists. And remember that this was written 33 years ago in March 1991. Here's his letter. Dear friends, as you were gathering at your April meeting, I want to express to you my great regret that I will not be able to be with you. I am spending the month of April in Germany to do some writing. Brian asked me to send you a few words to encourage you in your work and to assure you of my great desire to be connected with you. As I think of the words that are your theme for your gathering, I realize how much I identify with those words. The longer I live in ministry, the more I feel the call to become weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, broken with the broken. My life with people who have a mental handicap has confronted me more and more with my own handicaps, my own weaknesses, and my own brokenness. But the more I was willing to be confronted in a gentle, loving way, the more I discovered that God indeed chose to dwell where we can come together in a fellowship of the weak. There was a time when I really wanted to help the poor, the sick, and the broken, but to do it as one who was wealthy, healthy, and strong. Now I see more and more how it is precisely through my weakness and brokenness that I minister to others. I am increasingly aware of the fact that Jesus does not say, "Blessed are those who help the poor," but "Blessed are the poor." For me, this means that I have to come in touch with my own poverty to discover there the blessings of God and to minister from that place to others. It is only as the blessed ones that we can be a blessing for others. And I pray that we all dare to claim the blessing that rests in our poverty, our weakness, our non-togetherness, and that we can proclaim to others that where they are broken and in great need, the voice of God's love can often be heard. It is clear we need to heal. It is clear we need to protest against violence and injustice. It is clear that we have to do anything possible to avoid oppression, exploitation, and war. But this ministry of healing has to be a ministry in the name of the one who healed through his wounds and who revealed his healing presence as the crucified one, who took the marks of his crucifixion into his new life with God. So I pray that you embrace your own weakness and your own suffering and your own pain with trust that in this way you can follow your Lord and make your own wounds a source of healing for others. Thus you can also become a true light for the world and a sign of hope and a prophetic voice that calls for peace and justice. Your brother in Christ, Henri Nouwen. Now, the words of the conference that are referred to in the letter are words from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where Paul, the apostle, writes, "To the weak I made myself weak. I accommodated myself to people in all kinds of different situations so that by all means I might bring some to salvation. All this I do for the sake of the gospel, that I might share its benefits with others." Well, that's a very thoughtful letter. Yeah, it just cries out that care was taken in its composition. What was your reaction, Sharon, to Henry's letter to this gathering of Free Methodists?
I think my first reaction was yes and amen. And then what came to my mind was 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3-5, where the Apostle Paul writes, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who comforts us in all of our suffering, so that we can comfort those who suffer with the comfort we've received." In short, what stood out for me was the reciprocal and ongoing nature of comfort in the midst of suffering. And the second part would be certainly from a therapy standpoint, there is this idea that somehow the therapist, the helper, has got it all together. And so we provide support from the bounty of strength and invulnerability that we present. And our clients, who are just people, right, are the ones who are recipients. But I think what Henri reminds the gathering of the Free Methodist workers is that we too are in need of comfort. We too have known suffering, perhaps in various shapes and forms and various times. And there is something about that experience that we therefore share with those that we minister to. So it's back and forth as opposed to being very linear and unidirectional. So that speaks to me deeply.
Yeah, it seems that Henri is making a distinction, or maybe I'm drawing it myself, between sympathy and empathy.
Right.
We are conditioned to be sympathetic, but could it be that our calling is to be empathetic?
That's a good question. And perhaps I'm going to do the wrong thing and ask another question. I wonder if there is, depending on one's culture, I wonder if there is some sort of rule that we are not to show our weakness if we are in a position of power or strength or authority. That somehow weakness is to be avoided, hidden, it's only for certain people. And again, I would suggest that what Henri's doing is saying, no, it's kind of contextual. It's kind of based upon the role. There are times when we are called to be the one that helps. And there are also times when we are the one who needs the help. And so there's no shame in either position. There's this relationship, there's this mutuality. And those of us who maybe spend more time helping would do well to remember that we too have been helped. We too have walked through suffering and weakness.
Yeah, Christ is certainly the great example. And, Henri's book, The Wounded Healer, says that we need to understand ourselves as wounded people who are imitating the wounded healer.
I'd agree. And I think in an age, certainly now, 30 some odd years later, in the age of social media, there's so much curating of our image and so much wanting to tell a story about ourselves that is perfected and has risen above, which I suppose has its place. And it's hard to tell the story of, I'm still working it out. I still, there is a something in my gait that still isn't quite even. There's something in my heart that still feels heavy. There's something in my mind that's not quite put to right yet. I think there's something that Henri is calling us to remember, and be present to use that experience as a bridge to meeting with another person.
Yeah. The idea that that God in Christ has weaknesses is a startling proposition, but it's also encouraging. I find that that the Lord can understand us, and therefore we can understand each other.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I would suggest that part of that identification or understanding is that he was in real relationship with human beings. He was in real relationship with the natural world. So if the Lord were simply were only God on high, only existed in perfection, it might be difficult for him to understand his creation. But the Lord lived physically on the earth, dealt with people and all of our unique folly and joy. And so there's something I believe that Jesus understood, I'll say viscerally, what it was to be disappointed, what it was to be betrayed, what it was to lose somebody, what it is to be angry, and found a way of including his Father in those experiences. So I would suggest that for us, there's great consolation in identifying with Jesus and noting how he didn't stop loving or caring, even in those moments of real trial. And sometimes I wonder if it, again, speaking as a psychotherapist, sometimes people despise the fact that they've been hurt. And obviously no one wants to be hurt, don't get me wrong, but there's this sense in which, who's with me when I'm hurting? Who sees me when I don't quite get it right? And again, I imagine Henri is asking us, or asking his readers, to remember whether what it was like, or even what it's like currently, to be in need. And that's not to be despised. There's an embracing and eventually a reaching out that can occur in that point of need.
Yeah. Henry talks about how it's not that our calling is not to be there for people, but it's to be there with people.
100%.
And yeah, and you can only be with those whom you identify with. You have to understand that to be truly with them.
I wonder if that's where your idea, the notion of empathy, comes in, Bruce. Because if we are repulsed by suffering, that revulsion might invite us to be distant. But what if, in recognizing suffering, we were able to say, oh, I do know something of what that's like. And rather than being repulsed, we're drawn in, right? Rather than, I'll cast some kind of magic spell from afar, but I won't get close to you. What if we were able to embrace the suffering, not see it as so alien? Maybe we would get closer. Maybe we'd become more curious. Maybe we'd be happy to maybe sit simply alongside and give the gift of presence, and not just solutions or ideas, but really sit with somebody or our own self and say, wow, this is a tough season. I do think there's something transformative about being able to acknowledge or attune to suffering as a part of life. It may not be a reason of fault or having done something wrong. It might simply be just what is. And again, I hear that Henri is saying, that you can be a true light if you actually get curious about this experience of suffering.
Yeah. Curious for the other, not in a judgmental way, but in a compassionate way.
Absolutely. And in a way that invites maybe the sharing of what it's really like, as opposed to the performance of what it should be. We can sort of rush. I heard someone say in a training recently that the temptation is to rush around the stuck point. And I believe the call of the gospel is to go through the stuck point. And in the going through, we have companionship. So there's something, not that suffering is the end goal, but there's something about the process of through that can in itself be healing. So who is around us that can actually go through it with us?
I think a very terrible thing to say, which I've said, maybe many have said, when
Mhm,
they see someone suffering
mhm,
or even living the consequence of unfortunate decisions, we
mhm.
say, there, but for the grace of God, go
Oh,
I.
oy.
To say that that person is the other,
Yes.
uh, and instead to say, yeah, that person is my brother, that person is my sister,
Mhm,
yeah, and I
mhm,
need to not identify them in that way, but I need to kind of come alongside.
mhm,
Uh, Not there they go, but here I come
mhm. Oh, that's
in the
nice.
name of Christ.
Yes. Yeah. And I wonder if the identification is also, and in that circumstance, what would I have loved if it happened, if something we're familiar with? It would have been really great if someone had asked me, for example, um, is it in that place of suffering or weakness? I imagine the experience of feeling alone is quite prevalent. That feeling might invite us to not let anybody know that we're suffering or feeling weak, and so we get isolated. And again, in the wisdom of God, we're called into relationship that isn't exclusive or I don't know what's the right word I'm looking for. We can still come to God, right? The door has not been closed. So what is it about our experience that tells us no one will want to talk to us? We don't belong. So therefore we isolate. Wouldn't it be great if the one who was coming alongside could demonstrate that invitation of relationship, that I'm here because I see you and I hear you and I want to be with you. That has the element to me of being healing in and of itself. Whether or not we have solutions to offer, we want to dismantle isolation.
We are called to be weak. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it, the One of the stories in the Bible that came to my mind reflecting on this was Jesus talking about the Pharisee, the religious prominent person
Mm-hmm.
who stood at the corner, made a big display of his religiosity,
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm such an upstanding person. Thank you for not making me like one of these
Mm-hmm.
despised people over there."
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then contrast that with a person who didn't have it all together, who in the solitude beat his breast and said, um, I am a sinner, woe unto me, pleading for mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And that person was the one who received the gift of God,
Mm-hmm.
and the one who's so full of himself. Jesus says that person has already received his reward. What he wanted was adulation from
Mm-hmm.
the community. He got it. The one who was seeking to come in his brokenness to God received healing there.
Mm-hmm.
And we uh, are called to emulate that weak person,
Mm-hmm.
the humility.
Yeah, and so that makes me wonder, like almost like what's the benchmark? Like is it that I have all these things, I no longer need those things? Is the benchmark really about where I rank myself vis-a-vis other human beings? Or is the benchmark, how do I stand before God? And if we take the former idea, then the religious leader who's there vaunting his position, as the scripture says, he's received his reward. He wants adulation, cool. But if we have a higher perspective, we recognize that we each bear a certain amount of struggle and difficulty and joy and happiness. We each have our own portion of those things. And ultimately, what makes us human? Ultimately, we long for relationship. Ultimately, we face difficult circumstances. Ultimately, we're looking for that we want to be loved. If we could have the perspective of how my life has turned out, some things were my decisions, other things just are. Could I see my neighbor as being in a similar situation? And if my neighbor needed help, would I withhold it or would I want to give it? Because I would want to be helped. And I think that's also a place of vulnerability to recognize that, oh, I would want help. And while it might stink to have someone see me at my lowest, I would rather have someone offer than for them to see me and step over. So there's something really, I think there's something really, really powerful in this letter about the invitation to care because we've been cared for. The invitation to return, to give back, to remember. That's, I think, a really helpful message for those of us who are in roles that are seen as being the ones who help, the ones who heal, the ones who go into. There's something about that role that can obscure the times when we ourselves have needed help.
Henry, in the last years of his life, lived at L'Arche, Daybreak, a community in the northern part of Toronto, where he lived and ministered to people that have disabilities of various kinds, but also to those that were caring for them. Henry wrote that he was a blessing to the people that he cared for. One in particular, a man named Adam, with profound disabilities, and it was Henry's partner, and they were put together. Henry said, "I have been more blessed by Adam than he has been blessed by me." That Henry felt his own weakness, and that Adam had a strength that he was blessed by. That it was very much a reciprocal relationship. And if Henry had not been able to see his own weakness, he would not have been able to receive a blessing and be part of that community of blessing that flowed back and forth between them. How do we recognize our own weakness? The temptation is to say we're people that have it all together. I have my health, got a good job, I don't have any obvious disabilities, so I'm good. But there is a weakness, there is a need in me. How do we come to recognize that and use that as an avenue? Henry says in this letter that our weaknesses become our strength. They become the gifts that we can give to others.
Well, my first thought is that it's in relationship. And by that, I mean, it's possible to, in the exercise of our professional roles, it's possible to meet the folks that we help, right? And in the meeting, there may be some situations where it feels really easy and, oh, I can do that, no problem. And yet I would say that listening to someone tell their story, when it connects even slightly with something in our own lives, we remember that experience. So let's see if I can think of an example of this. I think about how we're not really good in conversations about death, right? That in our workplaces, you get a set amount of time for grieving. If it's this person, you get 5 days. This person, maybe you get half a day. And when we we don't know what to say to someone necessarily who's experienced a death. We don't want anybody to cry. We don't want, just like sort of have the ritual and we're done with it. And it seems to me that if we are really wanting to encounter those spots that we don't want anybody else to see, have someone show up who is experiencing that very thing. I imagine that for somebody who is a doctor, and say emergency room doctor, accustomed to all kinds of challenges the human body can face, that there's a certain amount of training that allows you to get on with the job. And yet there could be that one person in the ER one day with their unique injury that gets us. And you think, oh my God. And then maybe there are tears or there's anger. That's something about encountering somebody in a particular place of need reminds us that, we are not invincible. And how do we maybe push through? How do we attend to that? I would suggest that the attending to the impact of witnessing somebody else's vulnerability is the start of our dealing with our own vulnerability. So we've got to be able to see it or experience it, maybe put language to it. I find it really difficult. Personally, I find it really difficult if somebody has, if the human body is seen as frail. If there's an injury, I find that really hard. I don't like hospitals. But the times in my life when I have been called to visit folks in the hospital who are close to me, there is something, I'll say, miraculous that happens where I may be uncomfortable, but I know that my job right now is to be with this one who's in a rough spot. And so I can bring my discomfort with me. I can take a break. But ultimately, they're not asking me to heal them. They're asking me to be with them. And then in my own times of weakness and vulnerability, the thing I long for is someone just to be with me. They haven't got to do anything about it, but I want their presence. So I think that might be part of our ongoing lesson. Can we just show up and be, rather than show up and try to do something? Because inevitably the doing may be off. It's not what the other person is wanting.
Like Job's friends.
Right?
Oh, Job's life fell apart in every way imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
And then his friends came, and for 7 days, they
Mm-hmm.
just sat with him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when they were being people of blessing.
Mm-hmm.
After 7 days, they started to talk and wrecked everything. They should have just stayed quiet, just to have been the friend that Job needed, for sure.
Yeah, or even like the New Testament story of the man born blind, and the disciples, full of vim and vigor, seeing healings, like, oh Lord, who sinned? They see this man who does not have sight, and instead of seeing this man, they're looking elsewhere for solutions. And Jesus corrects them. In my head, it's a little bit of a face palm and goes, oh my goodness, okay, guys. It's not about who sinned. It's about, this is the day that the Lord is going to, God is going to show up in their life, in his life. There's something else that's important in this particular moment. So again, in the presence of weakness, could we see opportunity? And whether that opportunity is something very simple, like a cup of cold water, or something more dramatic, like a healing, could we just be in the here and now? Could we be present to it and stop fussing and running around and getting very, very busy? I think that's part of our discomfort with vulnerability, whether it is the person or whether it's our own not knowing what to do. Let's get busy. Let's create a distraction. What if you just got quiet for a moment and paid attention to who is before us? I think that might be a place of blessing in those circumstances.
I know what one of the mistakes that I can make, that many people make when we're in the presence of suffering,
Mhm,
that we don't know what to say.
mhm,
As you told us before, but when we do talk, we try to one up
mhm,
the suffering. Say, "Oh
mhm,
yeah, you got it bad, but you should have seen my sister-in-law. Yeah, what she went through. Oh, it was even
mhm,
worse." And
mhm,
and by doing that, we minimize, I think, the
mhm.
the the situation of the person. You know,
Yeah,
the idea of comparing doesn't really help anything. Yet, we are called to take this message of embracing weakness and suffering into our daily lives and
mhm,
ministries. How can we integrate that
mm.
message um, with the people that we come in contact
It's a great question. So what that sort of lands in a particular way for me, and the my response is probably take a breath. Um, whether that's a breath of recognition, like, oh my, let me just resource myself again. Um, and then there is a recognition, like a naming of what's happening here. What's happening here? Not everything that we see or we experience can be fixed, right? We are in a time right now where there are many wars of various scales that are going on, and all of our words don't change that. Um, we are in situations where, undescribable things happen on a regular basis, and our pity doesn't change that. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to acknowledge what's happening. But then I think there's a moment of pause to say, what could I bring to this situation? What could I offer? And then maybe that silence, that question followed by silence, might invite some kind of conversation. And we're back to what you had mentioned before, that reciprocal nature of any kind of helping relationship. Um, why can we not be for a moment? I One of my mentors told me a story of someone who had really had a lot of services in their life, lots of people coming to the door, and each service had their own particular pathway to healing, the way to address the situation. And when my mentor came to the door, so part of a long parade of helpers, the person was like, I don't want to hear anything from anybody. You all come with your own ideas, but no one listens to what I have to say. And so my mentor made a decision to listen, to continue to do what they had to do, show up and listen, and did so for a year, not offering any solutions, not trying to correct, just really hearing out this one who had been inundated by people's perspectives on the situation. And at the end of that year, the one who was supposedly in need said, you've listened to me and you haven't tried to change. Now I'm ready to hear what you might have to say. And while that can sound kind of topsy-turvy, it suggests to me that the power of listening and attending and really seeing is the first step. And perhaps by having done that, there's this opportunity to demonstrate a willingness, right? A willingness to hear, a
with.
willingness to understand, a willingness to continue to show up, even when nothing is being asked of us at the moment. And then the help can be offered. And what I hold on to that from that story is my mentor laid aside all of the skills and interventions and possibility and education that they could have brought to the situation and got back to basics. Listened respectfully, waiting for invitation as opposed to imposing their will. I feel like those are the ingredients that then get doled out in different measure depending on the circumstance.
Okay, so there's a lot of compassion is required for that, but also a lot of humility. That we come into contact with people who have tremendous needs, are broken or weak in various ways. We have to have compassion for them, but also have the humility to say that doesn't make them less than I, but together we can now journey along towards the one who was so deeply wounded himself. I mean, Christ, Jesus, in his incarnation, getting all theological, came and for 30 years, it strikes me as being like Job's friends. He lived his life, lived as a son, as a friend, not addressing the big needs of the world. But then the time came when it was time for him to step forward. And even so, he was always one with the people. He didn't set himself up as a king, as a gentle teacher. I find that helpful for me. And how do I comport myself? Not in a prideful way, but in a compassionate and humble way.
So I appreciate you saying that, Bruce. What you just said calls back to mind for me the 2 Corinthians passage where Paul is reminding the Corinthians that they have received comfort from God. And it's out of that comfort that they offer or can meet somebody else. If we forget, have a bit of comfort amnesia, because now we're living, the high life, or we're living really well, we lose that initial infilling that allows for the outpouring. If I think that as a psychotherapist, I just need to have book knowledge and be able to spew it out, that knowledge is going to run out. However, it's been my experience, and certainly more so over the past 4 years, when I consider what I have lived personally and professionally, those moments of deep struggle, I'm more inclined now to say, this is part of the human condition. Yes, I have received some comfort. It's out of that I'm giving, but I'm also going to be receiving from my clients what they have learned, their learned wisdom, the solutions or the avenues that actually have worked for them. And I'd be a fool not to pay attention to what they know they're willing to accept. When you speak about Jesus, knowing all that Jesus knew, he knew the beginning and the end of the story and everything in between, who still was willing to sit with folks who were on the margins, who still was willing to speak back to those who he knew wouldn't hear him, who was still willing in that scene during the Last Supper where he knows what Judas is up to and still says, go ahead and do your thing. That there's such a, what's the word? In my mind's eye, Jesus had a stillness about him. Not that he was slow to act, but there was a stillness about him. And I imagine that being that breath, right? That pause. that recognition that, oh, this is part of it, that allowed him to respond in the way that he responded when folks are really thick and not getting it. And I take that as comfort to say, let's be reminded once again, what is the dance that we are in as humans? We take some time to learn things. We are likely to rush off madly in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
We need that gentle landing when we say, oh, yeah, doing it again louder doesn't make it better. There's something about that pause, that stillness that's really important for us. And I imagine in the stillness, we then get to hear God's still small voice saying, before you do that, let me in. Before you rush off, have a think. Before you blast somebody, what was the hurt for you? And could we maybe address it differently? I believe the call of God is to be able to address it differently, to take the time to pause. And again, in Henri's letter, he's not condemning them for the work they're doing. He's inviting them to say, and how much of this work is a reflection of your own learning, growth, weakness, struggle? How much of being together is a chance to bandage one another's wounds? There's something really beautiful about that still, mindful pause.
Well, thank you, Sharon. The themes of this letter are exquisitely developed in Henri's book, The Wounded Healer.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone wants to ponder on these themes and hear Henri more on it, get a hold of that book and and read it. You'll be blessed. It was one in my own personal story. I was at a low point, feeling my own weakness. I think I can't continue down this road. And someone gave me that book and said, Bruce, read it. And it changed my life. It gave me hope, gave me a perspective on not only my own need, but on the nature of Jesus and what it means for me to be a servant of his. So very important themes. And Sharon, thank you for helping us to think through them so well. In your own life and experience, you're obviously a woman of faith, a leader in the community. What are the spiritual practices that sustain you and keep you on the right path?
So I would say probably the biggest one for me is music. That I had recently had the experience of hearing an exquisite choir in a cathedral. And it was a very small evensong service. And they were singing a cappella, and listening to the voices of these young people soar in that cathedral I felt I was transported somewhere. There's something about exquisite harmony that speaks to me. I'm also one who loves the boisterous, bring out the electric guitars and bass and the drums and having that kind of musical experience. And I think because I believe music to be a gift of God, and the ability of us to, with all of our differences, bring and make this, to be cliched, joyful noise moves me. And so in times of sadness or disappointment, I'm apt to turn on, whether it be choral music or gospel music or the newest contemporary something, and just listen to others express their faith in God. And that moves me. I would say the scripture that I shared in 2 Corinthians is what I would say the counselor's verse, to remember that we're not just all outpouring, we're infilled as well. And then I would say community. So I do believe that we encounter the face of God in one another. And sometimes when it's too hard to reach out to God directly, having someone else be kind of God's proxy and remind me that I am loved and beloved is a balm for a soul that's feeling kind of bruised and battered.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Sharon, for being with us today, for taking the time to share. And we really appreciate that. So thank you.
My pleasure. Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
The one thing I would add is I only met Henri Nouwen once, and it was in the context of a retreat. And I don't think at the time, this might be 1991 maybe, I don't think at the time I knew anything about Henri Nouwen. No idea. However, my memory of the retreat and of him at the retreat was, obviously he's a speaker. So if you bring a speaker in, someone's a big deal. What I remember is the humility of the man and his ability to move seamlessly amongst this group of new students. So it's quite something for me now to be part of the board and having this conversation, thinking I had no idea who he was, but there was sort of a warmth in the meeting, and now I'm learning more about him. So that's maybe another excuse to remember the value of how we are present with other people.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you also to you, our listeners. If you've been listening to the audio version of this conversation, know that you can also find a video version on YouTube, which you can access through our website, henrinouwen.org. And while you're there, you can poke around the website and learn about the other great programs and offerings of the Henri Nouwen Society, as well, of course, as sign up for the daily meditations, which many have told us they find great blessing in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a nice review. Give it a big thumbs up. And it would be nice if you'd share this with your family and friends. Say that maybe there's something good and helpful and true in it. Well, thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening. And never forget that you are a beloved child of God.
If you've been enjoying the Love Henri podcast, let me encourage you to consider doing two things. First, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And secondly, we'd be so grateful if you would consider donating to the Henri Nouwen Society so that we can continue to offer free resources to encourage people all around the world in their spiritual journeys. Head over to henrinouwen.org to subscribe and donate today. Thank you so much.